Picture this: a bridge built 2,000 years ago. Its stone arches standing unshaken as trucks rumble across it today. Now, think of a modern bridge, sleek and steel reinforced, collapsing after just a few decades. How is it possible that ancient structures, crafted without computers or calculators, outlast the engineering marvels of our time? The answer lies in a forgotten art, a blend of intuition and precision that modern builders somehow lost along the way. This isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about a philosophy of endurance, a way of thinking that turned stone into something nearly immortal. Take the Romans, for example. Their bridges weren't just functional, they were designed to breathe, to flex with the earth, to endure floods and earthquakes without crumbling. They understood something we've overlooked: that strength isn't just about brute force, but about harmony with nature. Modern materials like steel and concrete might seem indestructible, but they come with hidden weaknesses: corrosion, stress fractures, shortcuts taken in the name of speed and cost. Meanwhile, those ancient stone arches, they're still here because their builders thought in centuries, not quarterly profits. So what can we learn from these time-tested giants? This isn't just a history lesson, it's a wake-up call. The secrets of durability are etched into every block of those ancient bridges, waiting for us to rediscover them. As we peel back the layers of engineering, craftsmanship, and sheer ingenuity, you'll start to see the world beneath your feet in a whole new light. Because the real question isn't just why these old bridges still stand, it's why we ever stopped building things to last. Those ancient bridges weren't just built, they were orchestrated. Every stone, every curve was a deliberate response to the world around them. Take the Alcantara Bridge in Spain, for instance. Its builders didn't just stack rocks, they studied the river's currents, the valley's winds, even the way sunlight warmed the stone over seasons. They knew that to outlast time, the bridge had to become part of the landscape, not fight against it. Modern engineering often treats nature as an obstacle to overpower, but ancient builders saw it as a partner. That's why their arches aren't just strong, they're adaptive. When floods come, the water flows through the open spandrels, relieving pressure instead of resisting it. When the earth shakes, the mortar-free joints shift slightly, absorbing the shock like a tree bending in a storm. And then there's the material itself. Roman engineers didn't have steel or synthetic composites, but they had something better: time-tested stone and a mortar recipe so durable it's still a mystery today. Their concrete wasn't just glue, it was alive. Tiny cracks, they'd heal themselves as minerals in the water seeped in and crystallized. Compare that to modern concrete, which weakens with every freeze-thaw cycle, every salt-laced winter road. The irony: we've rediscovered this recently, with scientists now mimicking ancient Roman concrete formulas for seawalls that repair themselves. It turns out those primitive builders were millennia ahead of us. But perhaps the most striking difference is in the philosophy. Ancient bridge builders signed their work literally. Inscriptions on the Alcantara Bridge read, "I built this bridge to last forever." Not for a budget cycle, not until the next inspection, forever. That kind of ambition changes how you design everything. No cutting corners, no rushing deadlines. Just the relentless pursuit of perfection. Today, we've traded that long-term vision for efficiency, and the bridges and the budgets show the strain. Maybe it's time we ask not just how these ancient bridges stand, but what they're trying to tell us about the cost of forgetting how to build for the ages. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge was supposed to be a triumph of modern engineering, a sleek, slender ribbon of steel stretching across the water. But just 4 months after it opened in 1940, it began to sway violently in the wind, twisting like a ribbon until it finally tore itself apart. The footage is haunting, not just because of the destruction, but because it reveals a flaw in our thinking. We assumed newer meant better. The same pattern repeats with Italy's Morandi Bridge in 2018, where decades of corrosion hidden inside concrete led to a catastrophic collapse claiming 43 lives. These aren't freak accidents, they're symptoms of a deeper problem. Modern bridges are often designed to meet tight budgets and tighter deadlines, not to outlast empires. Steel and concrete give us strength and speed, but they come with invisible trade-offs. Steel corrodes from the inside out, like a slow-moving disease, while concrete develops microfractures that spread like spiderwebs under pressure. The Romans never had this issue. Their stone bridges distributed weight evenly, and their mortar actually grew stronger with time as minerals seeped in. Modern materials, by contrast, fight a losing battle against the elements. Salt from winter roads, vibrations from heavy traffic, even the subtle expansion and contraction from temperature changes, each one chips away at their integrity. And too often, inspections miss the warning signs until it's too late. But here's the irony: we know how to build bridges that last. The problem isn't technology, it's priorities. Ancient engineers worked with nature, designing arches that redirected forces instead of resisting them. Today, we often engineer against nature, relying on sheer material strength to overpower wind, water, and time. The result, bridges that might stand for 50 years instead of 500. The Morandi collapse wasn't just a materials failure, it was a failure of imagination. We forgot that durability isn't just about what you build with, but how you build. Maybe it's time to ask a different question. Instead of wondering why ancient bridges still stand, we should ask why we ever abandoned their lessons in the first place. The Tacoma Narrows and Morandi tragedies aren't just engineering failures, they're reminders that progress shouldn't mean discarding the wisdom of the past. After all, the best bridges aren't just connections between 2 points, they're handshakes with the future, and right now we're breaking that promise. The precision of ancient stone masonry wasn't just skill, it was a kind of poetry in motion. Each block was painstakingly shaped by hand, not to fit roughly together, but to lock into place like pieces of a three-dimensional puzzle. Without a single drop of mortar, these stones relied entirely on friction, gravity, and the exactness of their angles. The Incas were masters of this, constructing walls so seamless you couldn't slide a razor blade between the stones. And here's the genius of it: when an earthquake struck, those tightly fitted blocks would shift slightly, then settle back into place unharmed. Modern concrete, by contrast, cracks under the same stress because it's rigid. It fights movement instead of dancing with it. This dry stone technique wasn't just about survival, it was about foresight. Builders knew their bridges would settle over time, so they designed them to adapt. The Pont du Gard in France, for example, still stands after 2,000 years because its stones were laid with microscopic precision, allowing the structure to breathe and shift with the terrain. Today's bridges, bolted and welded into place, don't have that luxury. They're static, fighting against every tremor and settling inch until something gives. It's like the difference between a willow bending in the wind and an oak snapping in a storm. But perhaps the most humbling part, ancient masons achieved all this without lasers or computer models. They used simple tools, plumb bobs, wooden frames, and an intimate understanding of geometry passed down through generations. Their secret wasn't technology, it was patience. A single arch could take years to perfect, each stone carved and recarved until it fit just right. Compare that to modern construction, where speed often trumps precision, and the trade-offs become painfully clear. We've gained efficiency but lost something far more valuable, the art of building things that don't just endure but grow stronger with time. And that's the real lesson hidden in these ancient bridges. They weren't just structures, they were conversations with the future. Every stone was a promise, this will hold. Today, we've swapped that promise for shortcuts, and the cracks are showing. Maybe it's time we listen to the masons of the past, not as relics but as teachers, because somewhere between their hand-carved stones and our steel beams, we forgot that true strength isn't about resisting nature, it's about working with it. The Roman arch wasn't just a pretty curve, it was a stroke of genius that defied gravity itself. Picture a line of heavy stones stacked in a semicircle, each one pressing against its neighbors, channeling the weight of the entire bridge outward and down into the ground. Unlike a flat beam which sags under its own weight, the arch turns that weight into an advantage. The more pressure you put on it, the tighter its stones grip each other, locking the whole structure into place. This simple yet profound principle allowed Roman engineers to span rivers and valleys that would have been impossible to cross with straight beams. Modern bridges, with their flat decks and simple supports, might seem more efficient at first glance. But that simplicity comes at a cost. A flat design concentrates stress at a few critical points, usually where the deck meets the pillars. Over time, those spots wear down, crack, or rust, becoming ticking time bombs. The arch, by contrast, spreads the load evenly across its entire curve, so no single point bears the brunt. It's like the difference between standing on a single nail versus lying on a bed of them. One hurts immediately, while the other barely registers. And here's the kicker: the Romans didn't just stumble onto this idea. They refined it over centuries, tweaking the exact shape and angle of each arch to perfection. The Pont du Gard, for example, uses a slight variation in arch height, subtle adjustments invisible to the naked eye, to account for uneven terrain and shifting river currents. Modern engineers, armed with supercomputers and laser measurements, still study these ancient bridges to unlock their secrets. Because while we've invented materials 1,000 times stronger than stone, we've yet to match the sheer elegance of a well-designed arch. The irony: we know arches work. You'll still see them in modern aqueducts, train viaducts, and even some pedestrian bridges. But too often, we default to flat designs because they're quicker to build, cheaper to assemble, and easier to standardize. The arch demands patience, precision, and a willingness to work with physics instead of against it. In a world obsessed with speed and cost-cutting, that's a hard sell. But the next time you drive over a crumbling overpass, remember, the Romans built bridges without steel or concrete, and some of them are still carrying traffic today. Maybe it's time we stopped reinventing the wheel and started relearning the arch. Stone doesn't just sit there, it endures. Unlike steel, which weakens every time it bends, stone thrives under compression, growing more resilient with each passing century. Think of the granite blocks in Rome's Ponte Fabricio, their surfaces smoothed by 2,000 years of footsteps and weather, yet their cores as solid as the day they were cut. Volcanic rock, a favorite of ancient builders, actually hardens over time as minerals in rainwater seep into its pores, creating a natural seal against erosion. These materials weren't chosen at random. They were nature's gift to engineers who understood that durability wasn't negotiable. Steel, for all its strength, fights a losing battle against time. Hidden beneath concrete, it rusts invisibly, swelling until it cracks the very structure it's meant to reinforce. The Millau Viaduct in France, a marvel of modern engineering, will need constant maintenance to combat this silent decay, its steel tendons inspected, coated, and eventually replaced. Compare that to the Pont Saint-Bénézet in Avignon, where the original limestone piers still stand after 8 centuries, untouched by rust or fatigue. The difference isn't just material, it's a fundamental mismatch in philosophy. Ancient builders worked with stone's natural strengths, while modern engineering often tries to outsmart nature with materials that demand perpetual intervention. Concrete, the backbone of modern infrastructure, has its own Achilles heel. Modern mixes designed for quick setting and high strength are riddled with microscopic cracks from day one. Water seeps in, freezes, expands, and over decades the damage compounds. The Romans avoided this with their secret weapon, pozzolana ash. Their concrete didn't just resist water, it used it, absorbing moisture to trigger chemical reactions that filled cracks with new crystals. Scientists only cracked this code in the 21st century, discovering that Roman harbors submerged for millennia were actually growing stronger. Meanwhile, our concrete crumbles in 50 years, a stark reminder that innovation isn't always progress. So why did we abandon these time-tested materials? The answer lies in the relentless push for speed and scale. Stone is heavy, labor-intensive, and unforgiving. A single miscalculation means starting over. Steel and concrete let us span canyons in months, not generations. But this convenience comes at a cost, bridges that age like milk instead of wine. The tragic collapse of Minnesota's I-35W bridge in 2007 wasn't just a failure of inspection, it was a failure of material. Rusted gusset plates hidden beneath layers of paint gave way in seconds. Ancient builders would have shuddered at the idea of metal holding up a bridge. They knew stone might take longer to shape, but it would never betray them. Yet here's the twist, we're finally circling back. Engineers in the Netherlands are now testing self-healing concrete infused with bacteria that produce limestone when water enters cracks, a direct nod to Roman ingenuity. In Japan, seismic-resistant bridges incorporate sliding stone joints inspired by Inca masonry. The lesson isn't to reject modern materials, but to blend them with ancient wisdom. Because durability isn't about choosing stone or steel. It's about remembering that some materials have already stood the test of time. The real innovation might not be inventing something new, but rediscovering what we forgot. Roman concrete wasn't just strong, it was practically alive. While modern concrete cracks and crumbles under stress, the ancient version did something extraordinary. It healed itself. The secret lay in its volcanic ash, a reactive ingredient that transformed water from an enemy into an ally. When tiny fractures formed, rainwater seeped in, triggering a chemical reaction that filled the gaps with new minerals. Over time, the concrete didn't weaken, it grew tougher, like a scar tissue of stone. Scientists studying Roman harbors 2,000 years later found structures submerged in seawater that were denser and more intact than the day they were poured. Meanwhile, modern bridges and parking garages often show alarming decay within decades, their brittle surfaces flaking away like chalk. The difference comes down to chemistry. Portland cement, the backbone of modern concrete, is designed for speed and strength, not longevity. It hardens fast, creating a rigid matrix that's prone to microfractures. Salt, freeze-thaw cycles, and even the weight of traffic turn these hairline cracks into gaping wounds. Roman concrete, by contrast, was deliberately porous. Its volcanic ash and lime mixture formed a crystalline structure that welcomed water, using it to fuel ongoing chemical repairs. The irony: we've known about this self-healing property for centuries. Vitruvius wrote about it in his architectural manuals, yet industrialized construction chose the faster, cheaper path. Cost and convenience drove the shift. Roman concrete took months to cure properly, while Portland cement sets in hours, aligning perfectly with modern demands for rapid development. But the trade-offs are staggering. The U.S. alone spends billions annually repairing concrete infrastructure, from crumbling highways to corroded bridge supports. In 2019, engineers finally cracked the code of Roman self-healing concrete, publishing a recipe that mimics its volcanic ash chemistry. Yet adoption remains slow, trapped between construction timelines and the myth that newer must mean better. Perhaps the most telling example lies beneath the waves. At the ancient port of Caesarea, Roman concrete piers endured 2 millennia of Mediterranean storms, their surfaces roughened but their cores unbroken. Just a few miles away, modern concrete breakwaters built in the 1970s have already required multiple costly repairs. The lesson isn't just about materials, it's about patience. The Romans built for eternity, while we often build for the next inspection cycle. Now the tide may be turning. Researchers in the Netherlands are embedding bacteria in concrete that produce limestone when exposed to water, a bio-inspired nod to Rome's ancient wisdom. Other teams are experimenting with recycled volcanic ash to recreate the self-healing magic. The challenge isn't technological anymore, it's cultural. Will we prioritize speed over resilience once again, or finally listen to the whispers of 2,000-year-old harbors that refuse to sink? Those ancient masons didn't just carve stones, they carved promises. Walk across the Ponte Fabricio in Rome, and you'll find inscriptions naming the builders not as vanity but as accountability. It was a bold statement. This bridge will outlive you, your children, and their children. Contrast that with modern construction plaques, which often list contractors and completion dates, but never a guarantee. The difference is staggering. One culture built for immortality, the other for the next fiscal quarter. Take the Brooklyn Bridge, a rare modern exception. Completed in 1883, its designer, John Roebling, insisted on overbuilt cables and granite towers despite the extra cost and time. His famous words, "The bridge will speak for itself," and it has, surviving hurricanes, neglect, and even a plot to blow it up in World War II. But here's the tragedy. Roebling's approach became the exception, not the rule. Today, bids go to the lowest contractor who meets minimum safety standards, not the one proposing a 1,000-year design. The incentives are upside-down. Budgets reward cutting corners, not crafting legacies. The consequences ripple far beyond aesthetics. When the I-35W bridge collapsed in Minneapolis, the official report cited a design flaw in the gusset plate's thin, cheap metal sheets that saved pennies per pound but cost lives. Ancient engineers would have recoiled at such gambles. Their bridges used mass and redundancy. If one stone cracked, the arch redistributed the load seamlessly. Modern engineering, obsessed with lean efficiency, often strips away this built-in forgiveness. We've traded robustness for razor-thin margins, and the math eventually fails. Yet some are pushing back. In Norway, engineers building the Hålogaland bridge deliberately overdesigned its suspension cables, citing lessons from medieval cathedrals. In Japan, seismic-resistant bridges now incorporate keikashi techniques, ancient flexible joints inspired by wooden temples that sway during earthquakes. These aren't nostalgic gestures, they're admissions that our ancestors knew something we forgot. True resilience isn't just about surviving today's stresses, but tomorrow's unknowns. Perhaps the most telling difference lies in maintenance. Ancient bridges expected none. Their materials grew stronger with age, their designs self-stabilizing. Modern bridges, however, enter the world with expiration dates. Concrete decks need resurfacing, steel cables require replacement, bearings must be lubricated. When budgets tighten, maintenance gets deferred and decay accelerates. The Romans didn't have a department of transportation. They had a philosophy: build it right once. This isn't about romanticizing the past. Modern materials can achieve wonders the ancients never dreamed of. But somewhere between the Pantheon and prefabricated girders, we lost the thread. Durability isn't a technical challenge, it's a choice. When a 2,000-year-old aqueduct still delivers water and a 50-year-old overpass needs demolition, the message is clear. The future belongs to those who build like they mean to stay. Ancient builders understood something we've stubbornly ignored. Nature isn't an obstacle to conquer, it's a partner to dance with. Look at the Kintai Bridge in Japan, standing since the 1600s despite typhoons and earthquakes. Its wooden arches aren't anchored to the riverbed. They're perched on stone piers designed to let floodwaters surge through them, not against them. When the river swells, the bridge surrenders temporarily. Some planks wash away, but the core structure remains intact, ready to be reassembled like a resilient puzzle. Modern bridges, bolted rigidly in place, would snap under the same pressure, their concrete pylons acting as dams that amplify the water's destructive force. Climate change has turned this wisdom into urgency. The medieval chapel bridge in Switzerland survived 800 years of alpine weather until a 1993 fire. Not floods or frost claimed it. Meanwhile, bridges like Germany's Our Valley crossings collapsed in 2021 after record rainfall, their shallow foundations scoured away by currents they were never designed to handle. The difference: ancient builders planned for nature's extremes because they had to. They lacked the technology to brute force their way through problems. Their humility bred ingenuity, curved piers to break ice flows, elevated walkways to clear storm surges, even sacrificial components meant to fail first, protecting the whole. Modern engineering often treats flexibility as weakness. We pour concrete caissons deep into riverbeds, assuming stability equals strength. But when Hurricane Katrina hit, it wasn't the old, flexible bayou bridges that failed. It was the rigid overpasses, their fixed joints shattered by water they couldn't accommodate. The same pattern repeats with wildfires warping steel girders and permafrost thawing destabilizing Arctic highway supports. Nature doesn't fight fair, and our rigid designs are losing the battle. Some engineers are finally relearning old tricks. The Millau Viaduct in France, though modern, borrows from ancient principles. Its piers taper like tree trunks to flex in high winds, and its deck expands and contracts with temperature swings. In the Netherlands, new flood-resistant bridges incorporate controlled failure points inspired by medieval drawbridges, allowing sections to detach harmlessly during disasters. These aren't compromises, they're admissions that the ancients coded survival into their blueprints. The lesson isn't to abandon progress, it's to redefine it. A bridge that lasts centuries isn't just a structure, it's a student of the land it crosses. The Romans didn't conquer rivers, they listened to them. As storms grow fiercer and seas rise, maybe it's time we stopped building fortresses and started building partners. Because when the next flood comes, the bridges left standing won't be the strongest, they'll be the wisest. Florence's Ponte Vecchio isn't just a bridge, it's a masterclass in survival. While modern structures buckle under pressure, this medieval marvel has weathered everything from Nazi bombs to the Arno River's fiercest floods. The secret: a design that embraces imperfection. Those uneven, sharp-lined arches aren't just picturesque, they're strategic. By leaving the spandrels open instead of filling them with heavy masonry, the builders lighten the load, letting the bridge flex like a spine during floods. Modern engineers might cringe at the asymmetry, but the Ponte Vecchio laughs in the face of textbook perfection, proving that sometimes the best designs are the ones that break the rules. What's even more remarkable is how the bridge evolved. Originally built for defense, it transformed over centuries, first with butcher shops, then goldsmiths, even secret corridors for Medici dukes. Each adaptation added layers without compromising the core structure. Compare that to today's bridges, often demolished when needs change rather than reimagined. The Ponte Vecchio's builders understood something we've forgotten. Longevity isn't about building for a single purpose, but for endless possibilities. Those timber-framed shops clinging to its sides, they're not just charming, they're structural shock absorbers, dispersing weight and vibration like a living, breathing exoskeleton. Maintenance here isn't an afterthought, it's a ritual. For 700 years, Florentines have patched, propped, and preserved their bridge with the care of medieval surgeons. When floods washed away parapets in 1966, they didn't bulldoze, they salvaged stones from the riverbed and rebuilt. Modern infrastructure, by contrast, often follows a replace, don't repair mentality. The cost, a throwaway culture where bridges are designed to last decades, not centuries. The Ponte Vecchio stands as a quiet rebellion against this waste, its every scar a testament to the value of meticulous, loving upkeep. Perhaps the most striking lesson is in its humility. The bridge doesn't dominate the Arno, it negotiates with it. The elliptical piers cut through currents like a ship's prow, reducing erosion. The varying arch sizes account for the river's moods, wider where the flow is fierce, narrower where it's gentle. Modern bridges often fight rivers with sheer force, deepening channels and straightening bends. The Ponte Vecchio, though, dances with the water, a partnership forged over generations. It's no coincidence that the only time it faltered was in 1966, when upstream dams and urban development disrupted the Arno's natural flow, a stark reminder that even the wisest designs can't outlast our disregard for nature. So what does this mean for us? The Ponte Vecchio isn't just a relic, it's a mirror. Its survival hinges on three pillars we've abandoned: adaptability over rigidity, repair over replacement, and harmony over domination. As climate change reshapes our world, these aren't romantic ideals, they're urgent necessities. The next time you see a modern bridge wrapped in scaffolding for yet another repair, remember, Florence's Golden Bridge hasn't just stood the test of time. It's rewritten the rules. We like to think of progress as a straight line, each generation smarter, each invention better, but ancient bridges shatter that illusion. The Romans built aqueducts without finite element analysis software. The Incas shaped stones to seismic perfection without laser levels. These weren't lucky accidents. They were the result of knowledge honed over centuries, tested by trial and error, and refined through generations of hands-on work. Today, we've swapped that empirical wisdom for computer models, trusting simulations more than the weight of a stone in our hands. Consider the precision of the Archidiko Bridge in Greece, built 3,300 years ago. Its cyclopean masonry, massive limestone blocks fitted together without mortar, has survived earthquakes that would topple modern overpasses. The builders didn't need stress tests or algorithms. They had an intimate understanding of material behavior, passed down through apprenticeships. A master mason could feel when a stone's grain would bear weight, or how slight angles could distribute force. That tactile knowledge, accumulated over lifetimes, can't be replicated by even the most advanced software. Digital simulations might predict how a bridge should behave, but they can't capture the 1,000 tiny variables, the way wind wears a surface over decades, or how groundwater subtly shifts a foundation. Modern engineering often treats craftsmanship as nostalgia. We automate, standardize, and optimize, chasing efficiency at the expense of resilience. The result: bridges designed to meet code minimums, not transcend them. When the Genoa Morandi Bridge collapsed in 2018, investigators found corroded cables and thin concrete floors that might have been caught by a builder who knew his materials as intimately as a potter knows clay. Ancient engineers didn't have the luxury of redundancy. Every stone had to earn its place. That relentless scrutiny bred structures that didn't just meet expectations, they defied them. Yet here's the paradox: we have the tools to merge old wisdom with new technology. Some forward-thinking firms now use AI to analyze ancient designs, uncovering principles lost to time. In Switzerland, engineers are reviving medieval timber joinery for earthquake-resistant bridges, blending CD models with centuries-old carpentry techniques. The breakthrough isn't in choosing between tradition and innovation, but in realizing they were never opposites. The best bridges of the future might just be those that remember the past. The real myth isn't that ancient builders were primitive, it's that we've outgrown their lessons. Those weathered stone arches aren't relics, they're open textbooks. And if we're willing to read them, they might just teach us how to build a world that lasts. High in the Andes, the Inca didn't just build bridges, they grew them. Their Huachuca rope bridges, woven from twisted mountain grass, swayed over dizzying gorges, connecting an empire without a single stone or metal nail. At first glance, they seem fragile, even reckless grass strands spanning hundreds of feet. Yet these were no temporary fixes. Some endured for over 5 centuries, outlasting steel rivals because the Inca understood something profound. Durability isn't about unbreakable materials, but unbreakable habits. Every year, entire villages gathered to renew the Huachuca in a days-long ritual. Old fibers were cut away, new ones woven in, each family contributing strands under the guidance of master weavers. This wasn't maintenance, it was a living covenant between people and place. The bridge wasn't a static object, it was a cycle, constantly reborn. Compare that to modern infrastructure, where repairs only happen after rust creeps or concrete crumbles. The Inca didn't wait for decay, they preempted it, treating upkeep as inevitable as sunrise. The materials themselves were genius in their humility. Grass ropes flexed with wind and earthquakes, absorbing shocks that would snap rigid modern cables. When fibers frayed, they gave gradual warning, unlike hidden steel corrosion that fails catastrophically. And because the bridges were light, they placed minimal stress on canyon walls, no need for deep drills or concrete pylons that destabilize landscapes. The Inca worked with the mountains, not against them, creating structures that were as much a part of the terrain as the cliffs themselves. But the real innovation was cultural. Bridge renewal wasn't assigned to contractors or bureaucrats, it was woven into the fabric of community life, as essential as planting or harvest. Skills passed down through generations ensured no knowledge was lost, no technique forgotten. Modern infrastructure, by contrast, often suffers from institutional amnesia, original blueprints misplaced, maintenance schedules ignored, until a Minnesota or Genoa reminds us too late of the cost of neglect. Could we adopt this mindset today? Imagine a world where bridges aren't just inspected, but celebrated, where neighborhoods gather to replace worn cables before they snap, where engineers apprentice under elders who have maintained the same span for decades. Some forward-thinking cities are already experimenting. In Japan, certain towns hold annual bridge festivals where locals learn basic maintenance, while Dutch engineers design modular components meant for easy, incremental replacement. The lesson isn't that we should abandon steel for grass. It's that the Incas' true breakthrough wasn't their ropes, it was their rhythm. They built with the understanding that nothing lasts forever, but everything can last longer if cared for relentlessly. In our rush to construct and move on, we've forgotten that the strongest bridges aren't just the ones we build, but the ones we keep rebuilding strand by strand, year after year. The Roman Emperor Augustus once boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble, a statement about legacy as much as architecture. That same mindset shaped ancient bridges, where builders willingly invested fortunes in materials and labor, knowing the costs would pale against centuries of service. The Alcantara Bridge in Spain consumed 2% of the entire Roman province's annual budget, a staggering sum for a single crossing. Yet 2,000 years later, it still stands, its original investment amortized to pennies per year. Modern infrastructure, by contrast, operates on a different calculus: minimize upfront costs, even if it means rebuilding every 50 years. The math seems logical until you realize we're not saving money, we're deferring payments with interest. Take asphalt versus stone paving. Ancient bridges like the Ponte Pietra in Verona used massive basalt blocks, each hand cut to interlock perfectly. The initial price was steep, but after 20 centuries, those stones remain nearly wear-free. Modern asphalt decks, though cheaper to install, require resurfacing every decade, accumulating costs that eventually dwarf the original savings. A 2021 study by the American Society of Civil Engineers found that deferring maintenance on U.S. bridges cost 6 times more than timely repairs, a textbook example of false economy. The Romans didn't have spreadsheets, but they understood compound interest: spend wisely once or bleed gold forever. The disconnect lies in accountability. Ancient engineers like Apollodorus of Damascus, who designed Trajan's bridge across the Danube, staked their reputations on projects meant to outlast empires. Contracts weren't awarded to the lowest bidder but to the most proven craftsmen. Fast forward to modern procurement, where cost-cutting often trumps quality. The infamous collapse of Italy's Morandi Bridge revealed contractors had used cheaper, thinner cables to shave expenses, a decision that ultimately cost 43 lives and over €300 million in reconstruction. When budgets prioritize short-term wins over long-term value, disasters aren't accidents, they're inevitabilities, yet some are challenging this cycle. Norway's new coastal highway project allocates 30% more upfront for corrosion-resistant materials, betting that tripling the lifespan will save billions in replacements. Japan's Century Bridges program mandates 100-year durability standards with penalties for premature failures. These pioneers grasp what ancient builders knew instinctively: true economy isn't about building cheap, it's about building once. Perhaps the most revealing comparison lies in cultural priorities. Medieval Florence taxed merchants extra to fund the Ponte Vecchio's overbuilt piers, knowing their grandchildren would thank them. Today, politicians balk at infrastructure bills that outlast their terms, trapping us in a cycle of decay and stopgap fixes. The irony: we're already paying for permanence just in invisible installments. Every band-aid repair on a crumbling overpass, every traffic detour around a condemned bridge, is another line on a tab our grandchildren will inherit. The lesson isn't that we lack the resources to build for the ages, it's that we've misplaced the will. When the Romans inscribed, "I built this to last forever," on their bridges, they weren't boasting. They were accounting. Roman engineers didn't just build bridges, they built relationships with rivers. Take the piers of the Ponte Sant'Angelo in Rome, submerged at angles that redirect currents like a ship's hull slicing through water. This wasn't guesswork, it was hydrodynamics mastered through observation. When floods came, these wedge-shaped piers split the torrent, creating eddies that swept debris away instead of letting it accumulate. Modern vertical piers, by contrast, act like walls in a stream, collecting driftwood and sediment until the pressure becomes unbearable. The difference. Ancient builders accepted that rivers were partners with moods, not static lines on a blueprint. Medieval masons took this further with their bridge profiles. The old London Bridge's 19 arches weren't uniform. They narrowed near the banks where currents slowed, widening at the center to handle peak flows. Its starlings, those star-shaped pier foundations, acted as natural debris filters, breaking apart ice and logs before they could jam. Compare that to modern standardized spans, where identical modules ignore a river's changing personality from bank to bank. When Hurricane Harvey hit Houston in 2017, it wasn't the vintage bridges that failed, it was the newer ones, their rigid symmetry creating choke points for floodwaters. Climate change is exposing the fragility of our one-size-fits-all approach. The ancient builders of the Koju Bridge in Iran faced a harsher truth. Their Zayandeh River dried up for months, then surged with meltwater. Their response, a bridge that doubled as a dam, with sluice gates to regulate flow and step terraces to dissipate energy during floods. Today's bridges, engineered for historical weather data, crumble when faced with unprecedented rains. The collapse of Germany's Ruhr Valley bridges in 2021 wasn't just about water volume, it was about designs that treated climate as a constant rather than a conversation. The most humbling lessons come from adaptation. In Peru, the Inca built suspension bridges from woven grass materials that seemed flimsy until you realized their genius. During El Niño rains, when stone bridges washed away, the flexible grass spans swayed but held. When fibers frayed, villagers replaced strands in days without heavy machinery. Modern steel cables, though stronger, fail catastrophically when corrosion hits, and replacing them means closing highways for months. The Incas' approach wasn't primitive, it was resilient by design, embracing impermanence as a form of durability. Now engineers are finally listening. The Netherlands' new living bridges incorporate muscle colonies that naturally strengthen pier foundations, mimicking Roman concrete's self-repair. In Colorado, designers are studying Anasazi cliff dwellings to learn how overhangs protected structures from erosion. These aren't retro solutions, they're upgrades, blending ancient wisdom with modern materials. Because resilience isn't about resisting change, it's about bending like the Qaswachaka grass bridges, knowing that sometimes survival means swaying with the storm rather than standing rigid against it. The irony, we've spent centuries assuming progress meant conquering nature, only to realize the ancients were ahead of us all along. Their bridges didn't fight floods, they danced with them. As our climate grows more unpredictable, that dance may be the only way forward. After all, the oldest bridges still standing aren't the ones that stood firm, they're the ones that knew how to move. When the Silver Bridge collapsed into the Ohio River in 1967, killing 46 people, investigators found a crack no wider than a pencil lead, the culmination of years of overlooked fatigue in a single eye-bar chain. This wasn't just a material failure, it was a human one. Inspectors had flagged concerns years earlier, but their reports were buried under paperwork and budget constraints. Contrast that with the Roman builders of the Pons Aemilius, who carved their names into the keystones not as signatures but as vows. If their arches failed, so did their legacies. Modern engineering often lacks that personal stake, decisions made by committees, inspections rushed to meet deadlines, warnings drowned out by the drumbeat of profit. Ancient projects moved at the speed of trust. The master masons who built the Pont du Gard didn't answer to shareholders demanding quarterly returns. They answered to emperors who valued permanence over speed. Each stone was approved not by a checklist, but by the experienced hands of craftsmen who'd spent lifetimes learning the language of rock. Today, a single overpass might involve dozens of subcontractors, each siloed in their tasks, with no one person holding the full vision. The cracks in this system aren't just metaphorical, they're the frayed cables of the Genoa-Morandi Bridge, the corroded joints of Minneapolis I-35W, each disaster revealing a chain of decisions where someone, somewhere, chose good enough over lasting. Bureaucracy has its place, standardized codes and safety regulations save lives, But when red tape replaces accountability, systems fail in predictable ways. The London Millennium Footbridge's infamous wobble wasn't due to ancient ignorance. It stemmed from engineers relying too heavily on computer models without real-world testing. Meanwhile, the Inca's grass bridges swayed safely for centuries because the builders felt the tension in every fiber, adjusting the weave by intuition honed through generations. Modern engineering isn't lacking knowledge, it's lacking the kind of hands-on wisdom that can't be outsourced to software, yet there are glimmers of change. After the Surfside condo collapse in 2021, Florida mandated stricter oversight for aging structures, putting licensed engineers personally liable for inspections. In Japan, the shokunin ethos, craftsmanship as a moral duty, is reviving in infrastructure projects, with architects staying involved decades after construction. These aren't nostalgic throwbacks, they're admissions that some ancient ideas were right all along. A bridge shouldn't just meet code, it should bear the pride of its makers. Because when the stakes are measured in lifetimes, close enough is never enough. Scientists in 2023 finally cracked the code behind Roman concrete's miraculous self-healing, and the answer was hiding in plain sight for 2,000 years. When tiny cracks form in these ancient structures, rainwater seeping in reacts with volcanic ash in the mix, creating needle-like minerals that stitch the gaps shut like microscopic bandages. It's not just repair, it's regeneration, turning weaknesses into strengths over time. Modern concrete, by contrast, fights a losing battle against cracks. Water infiltrates, freezes, and expands, turning hairline fractures into gaping wounds. The irony: we've known about Roman concrete's durability since Vitruvius wrote about it in the 1st century, yet we've spent centuries reinventing a weaker version. The reluctance to adopt this ancient wisdom reveals a deeper bias. Modern engineering often equates innovation with novelty, as if solutions only count if they're invented yesterday. When researchers at the University of Utah published their breakthrough on Roman concrete's self-healing mechanism, construction firms hesitated. Too slow setting. Too expensive. Too untested, a laughable claim for a material that's outlasted empires. The real issue: our entire industry is built around Portland cement, from factory specifications to union labor skills. Retooling for an ancient recipe would require rewiring an ecosystem, not just changing a formula. Yet the cost of resistance is staggering. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that deferred maintenance on U.S. concrete infrastructure alone will require trillions by 2040. Meanwhile, Roman harbors like Portus Cosanus, submerged in seawater for 2 millennia, are stronger today than when they were poured. The difference isn't just chemistry, it's philosophy. Roman builders expected concrete to improve with age, while we design ours with expiration dates. Some forward-thinking projects are finally bridging this divide. The Netherlands is testing bacterial concrete that mimics Roman self-healing, while Italian engineers are blending volcanic ash into repairs for Venice's crumbling foundations. The lesson here isn't about trading progress for nostalgia. It's about recognizing that some innovations are timeless. Roman concrete isn't a relic, it's a benchmark we're still struggling to meet. As climate change accelerates decay in our bridges and buildings, the choice becomes clear: keep patching our brittle modern materials, or humble ourselves before the ancients who cracked durability code centuries ago. The harbors of Caesarea didn't survive by accident. They were built by people who understood that true strength isn't about resisting time, it's about collaborating with it. Those ancient builders understood something we've largely forgotten. Beauty isn't just decoration, it's engineering. Take the gargoyles of the Pont Vaillantre in France. their snarling mouths not just artistic flourishes but precision-crafted spouts designed to hurl rainwater clear of the bridge's fragile mortar. Every dragon's tongue and angel's wing served dual duty, delighting the eye while protecting the structure. Even the intricate carvings on Roman bridges weren't vanity projects. They subtly reinforced stress points, their swirling patterns following the flow of forces like a visible blueprint. This marriage of form and function wasn't accidental, it was survival. When aesthetics and structure work in harmony, preservation becomes cultural instinct. People fight to save what they love. Modern minimalism often strips this synergy away. The sleek, unadorned beams of contemporary bridges might look clean, but they've lost the built-in diagnostics of ornamentation. On the Charles Bridge in Prague, worn carvings around the arches signaled where stone was weathering centuries before cracks appeared. Today's smooth, concrete surfaces hide their weaknesses until they fail catastrophically. There's a deeper cost too. When bridges become purely utilitarian, communities stop seeing them as treasures worth maintaining. The medieval Bridge of Sighs in Venice owes its survival not just to sturdy stone but to the collective pride it inspires. Its delicate fretwork isn't frivolous, it's a daily reminder that infrastructure can be heirloom. Even the colors of ancient bridges served strategic purposes. The red ochre wash on China's Anji Bridge wasn't just decorative, it acted as a primitive sealant, its iron-rich pigments reacting with rainwater to form a protective film. The gold leaf on Florence's Ponte Vecchio, more than just Medici opulence, it reflected sunlight, preventing uneven heating that could warp the structure. Compare that to modern gray concrete, which absorbs heat, expands, and cracks under thermal stress. Our pursuit of visual simplicity has inadvertently created structures that age faster. Perhaps most striking is how ancient ornamentation educated the public about load paths. The zigzag patterns on Islamic bridges like Iran's Coc Pol weren't random. They traced the lines of force, showing where weight flowed from deck to pier. In an era before engineering degrees, these visual cues helped repair crews identify critical areas. Today's hidden steel girders and box beams offer no such guidance. When the Fern Hollow Bridge collapsed in Pittsburgh in 2022, inspectors admitted they'd underestimated corrosion, partly because the design obscured key joints behind smooth panels. The lesson here isn't about adding frivolous flourishes. It's recognizing that the most enduring designs engage both our minds and our emotions. When a bridge's beauty is woven into its bones, when every sculpture cools the masonry, every fresco seals the cracks, it doesn't just stand longer. It matters more, and in the end, that might be the most durable material of all. Ancient societies didn't just maintain their bridges, they revered them. The Pont du Gard wasn't merely an aqueduct, it was a sacred trust, its stones scrubbed clean by generations who saw its survival as a point of civic pride. When cracks appeared, they were filled not with hurried patches, but with stones cut by masons who matched the original work down to the tool marks. This wasn't upkeep, it was stewardship, a pact between the living and the unborn. Fast forward to today, where the average U.S. bridge lasts 43 years before being labeled structurally deficient, a bureaucratic euphemism for waiting to fail. The difference isn't just about materials or skill, it's about seeing infrastructure as heirlooms versus appliances. Consider the fate of two bridges separated by centuries. Japan's Kintai Bridge, built in 1673, has burned and been rebuilt 12 times, not because it was flimsy, but because each generation considered its wooden arches a legacy worth preserving. Meanwhile, Minnesota's I-35W bridge collapsed in 2007, not from neglect, but from a culture that prioritizes replacement over repair. The original plans called for thicker steel gussets, but contractors opted for cheaper, thinner plates to shave costs. When inspectors later flagged rust, the response wasn't restoration. It was temporary supports until a new bridge could be funded. The lesson: ancient societies fixed flaws before they failed. We budget for disasters after they strike. This disposable mindset exacts a hidden toll. The Pont du Gard's caretakers spent centuries adding subtle reinforcements, buttresses here, drainage channels there, each intervention so seamless it's invisible to untrained eyes. Modern infrastructure, by contrast, follows a cycle of decay and demolition. Take New York's Kosciuszko Bridge, built in 1939. It was demolished in 2017 after decades of patchwork repairs failed to address its flawed design. The replacement cost over $900 million, money that could have funded a century of meticulous maintenance had the original been built and cared for like the Pont du Gard. The math is brutal. We're spending more to rebuild poorly than our ancestors spent to build perfectly. Yet some are breaking the cycle. Switzerland's Chapel Bridge, first erected in the 14th century, still stands today because Luzon treats it as a living heirloom. Every decade, specialists replace individual timbers using medieval joinery techniques, ensuring the structure ages like a violin rather than a cardboard box. In Peru, communities still renew the Huachuca grass bridge annually, not because they lack modern materials, but because they understand that maintenance isn't a chore. It's a ritual that binds generations. These cultures grasp a truth we've forgotten. When you build something to last centuries, you invest not just in stone and mortar, but in the people who will care for it long after you're gone. Imagine if we applied this philosophy to modern infrastructure. What if every bridge came with a 1,000-year maintenance plan, funded by trusts rather than political whims? What if engineers apprenticed for decades on a single structure, learning its quirks like a family doctor knows a patient's history? The Pont du Gard didn't survive by accident. It survived because someone, somewhere, always believed it was worth saving. Our bridges collapse not from a lack of knowledge, but from a lack of love. And that's something no budget line item can fix. Ancient engineers didn't have supercomputers to simulate stress loads or laboratories to test material limits. They had something far more unforgiving: reality. Every bridge they built was a live experiment, with nature as the ultimate professor. When the first Roman arch collapsed under heavy rains, they didn't scrap the concept. They studied the wreckage, adjusted the curvature, and tried again. The Pont du Gard's final, flawless form wasn't the result of a single eureka moment. It was the product of generations observing how water flowed, how stones settled, and how cracks propagated under pressure. This wasn't guesswork, it was data collection on a societal scale, with each failure etched into collective memory as sharply as the grooves in their chisels. Consider the iterative genius of the Inca's suspension bridges. Early versions likely swayed dangerously or snapped under load, but instead of abandoning the design, builders refined the weave pattern, the rope thickness, even the way villages coordinated tension during construction. By the time the Spanish arrived, these grass spans could support cavalry charges, a feat that stunned conquerors who'd assumed their iron and stone technology was superior. Modern engineers might dismiss trial and error as primitive, but there's a profound difference between theoretical perfection and proven resilience. Computer models can predict how a bridge should behave, but they can't account for the 1,000 unpredictable variables the way a rare monsoon might test drainage, or how centuries of foot traffic might wear a particular step. Ancient builders accounted for these not with algorithms, but with layers of hard-won experience. This gradual refinement created structures that weren't just strong, but adaptive. The segmented arches of China's Jeju Bridge, for instance, evolved over decades to handle seismic shifts. early versions may have cracked during quakes, but later iterations incorporated slight asymmetries that allowed the bridge to flex like a spine. Modern engineers, armed with precise calculations, often optimize for ideal conditions only to be blindsided by real-world chaos. When the Tacoma Narrows Bridge twisted itself apart in 1940, it wasn't due to a lack of math. It was because wind dynamics at that scale hadn't been experienced yet. Ancient builders would have recognized this hubris. They knew no design was truly proven until it had weathered storms, quakes, and generations of use. The irony. Modern engineering is now relearning these old lessons through observational construction, a fancy term for what medieval masons did instinctively. Japan's Akashi Kaikayo Bridge, for example, underwent years of real-world monitoring before final adjustments were made to its cables. Dutch engineers studying dike failures have revived ancient techniques like willow revetments after realizing textbook hydraulics couldn't match centuries-old solutions. The best of both worlds emerges when cutting-edge tools are paired with ancient patience, using sensors to detect stress points, then applying time-tested remedies like tapered piers or sacrificial components. Perhaps the most humbling lesson lies in timelines. The Romans didn't rush the pons fabricius, they let it settle, observed its behavior through seasons, and made tweaks over years. Today, we pour concrete on Monday and drive trucks over it by Friday, then act surprised when it crumbles in decades. Speed and precision aren't enemies of durability, but without the wisdom of iteration, they're just educated guesses. Those ancient bridges still standing today aren't relics of ignorance. They're monuments to humanity's oldest and most reliable teacher, time. Ancient builders didn't just construct bridges, they conducted silent conversations with the earth itself. Walk the path of the Pont d'Avignon in France, and you'll notice it doesn't span the Rhône at its widest point, but where the riverbed's bedrock rises closest to the surface. This wasn't coincidence, it was geological wisdom passed down through generations of river travelers who noted where winter floods deposited less sediment, where the current ran smoothest, where the very bones of the land offered themselves as natural foundations. Modern GPS might pinpoint coordinates with millimeter precision, but it can't match the accumulated knowledge of centuries of feet testing fordable spots, of hands feeling for the most stable outcrops. Compare this to the tragic case of the Champlain Bridge in Montreal, built in 1962 atop soft clay that engineers knew was problematic. Its supports began sinking almost immediately, requiring constant jacking up. A 30-year game of geological whack-aim, all that ultimately cost over $4 billion in repairs and early replacement. Ancient builders would have walked right past that site, recognizing the trembling mudflats as unfit. They worked with the landscape's grain, not against it, understanding that no amount of steel reinforcement could compensate for ignoring the whispers of the earth. The Inca took this further with their rope bridges, which might seem precarious until you realize they only spanned canyons where the rock walls were solid granite anchored not just by ropes, but by the very geology itself. The Huachuca sways, but its endpoints are bolted to bedrock that hasn't moved in millennia. Modern suspension bridges, by contrast, sometimes anchor in whatever soil happens to be near population centers, requiring massive artificial caissons to compensate. When the original Tacoma Narrows Bridge failed, part of the problem was its location in a wind funnel created by the very hills engineers ignored during planning. Political expediency often overrides this ancient wisdom today. The Morandi Bridge in Genoa was rerouted during construction to avoid displacing factories. Its supports planted in unstable filled dirt rather than the solid strata just 300 meters away. The infamous Bridge to Nowhere in Alaska, funded by pork barrel politics, was doomed before the first concrete pour. its remote location requiring expensive techniques to stabilize permafrost that ancient builders would have simply avoided. Even ancient Rome wasn't immune. The Pons Sublicius failed repeatedly because politicians insisted on building at a ceremonial site with poor foundations, while the nearby Pons Aemilius thrived on better geology. Yet some modern projects are relearning these lessons. Norway's Atlantic Road zigzags between islands not along the shortest path, but where wave studies showed the least violent surf. China's Doge Bridge, the world's highest, was only possible because engineers spent years mapping the karst formations to find the one stable axis between sinkholes. These successes prove it's not about abandoning technology, but combining it with ancestral respect for the land. The starkest evidence lies in survival rates. Of the 20 oldest still standing bridges in the world, 19 follow natural crossing points used since prehistoric times. The 20th, a Roman vanity project that collapsed twice before they got it right. The message is clear: geology never compromises. Those who listen build bridges that stand for millennia. Those who don't, they build expensive lessons. To the ancient Maya, a bridge wasn't just timber and rope, it was a portal between realms, its pylons driven deep into the underworld and its span reaching toward the heavens. Their Sakbiab, or white roads, connected cities across swamps and sinkholes, but also served as spiritual pathways for rituals. Every stone was laid with prayers, every arch blessed by priests. When a bridge collapsed, it wasn't just infrastructure failing, it was a cosmic thread snapping. This sacred duty compelled builders to craft structures that would endure not just years but epochs. The Bridge of the Gods in Teotihuacan wasn't merely functional. Its alignment with the Pleiades constellation turned it into a celestial calendar, its shadow marking solstices on the temple steps below. Compare that to today's overpasses, where concrete is poured between traffic cones, and the only ceremony is a ribbon cutting before the next budget meeting. In Norse mythology, the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost connected Asgard to Midgard, guarded by the god Heimdall against its destruction, a metaphor for vigilance we've forgotten. Viking builders took this symbolism literally, carving protective runes into bridge timbers and sinking silver coins into foundations as offerings to the spirits of the water. These weren't superstitions, they were psychological contracts with eternity. When modern engineers in Sweden excavated the 11th century Holmgard Bridge, they found its oak pilings still intact after a millennium in peat, not because the wood was special, but because every generation maintained it as a sacred trust. Today, we armor our bridges with galvanized steel, yet they rust faster than those Viking timbers because no one believes in them enough to whisper a blessing. The Japanese understood this interplay between physical and spiritual durability. The Kintai Bridge's 5 wooden arches mirrored the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, wind, and void, each segment designed to be dismantled quickly when typhoons came. Locals didn't mourn these seasonal disassemblies. They celebrated them as purification rituals, weaving fresh ropes and replacing planks in ceremonies that bound community to structure. Contrast this with modern disaster responses, where collapsed bridges become political footballs, their rebuilds delayed by liability disputes. The Kintai still stands after 12 reconstructions because its people see it not as a convenience, but as a living entity, a perspective that turns maintenance into devotion. Even the Romans, pragmatic as they were, infused their bridges with divine purpose. The Pons Sublicius was rebuilt solely with wood, no metal, to honor an ancient treaty with the river god Tiber. Senators presided over its annual inspection, not as bureaucrats, but as priests ensuring the pact between Rome and its waterways remained unbroken. Modern environmental reviews, for all their data, lack this visceral covenant. When the Tiber flooded in 2020, it swallowed modern embankments while the ruins of Roman piers stood firm, not by accident, but because those builders knew a bridge that ignores its river's will is doomed. The lesson isn't about reviving pagan rites, it's about recognizing that the most enduring structures emerge from cultures that see them as more than steel and stone. When the Incas wove their grass bridges, they weren't just crossing gorges. They were weaving relationships between mountain spirits and villagers. Today, we calculate load ratings and traffic flows, but forget that a bridge is a conversation between land, people, and time. Perhaps that's why our spans crumble while theirs endure. You don't neglect something you believe speaks to the gods. So what would change if we rebuilt this lost reverence? Imagine a world where every bridge groundbreaking begins not with backhoes, but with soil samples blessed by local elders, where engineers apprentice under poets to learn how arches can rhyme with horizons. Where inspections aren't just about cracks, but about asking, will this hold my great-grandchild's weight? Because the terrifying truth is this: we don't lack the technology to build forever. We lack the love. The future of bridge engineering is unfolding in laboratories where scientists are staring at 2,000-year-old Roman concrete samples under electron microscopes, searching for secrets our ancestors baked into their recipes. These researchers aren't just preserving history, they're reverse engineering it. At MIT, engineers have created a self-healing concrete infused with bacteria that produce limestone when exposed to water, mimicking the way Roman harbors silently repaired themselves for centuries. The bacteria lie dormant until cracks form, then spring to life like microscopic masons, filling gaps with a biological mortar stronger than the original mix. It's not just innovation, it's resurrection, blending cutting-edge microbiology with a forgotten art. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, architects are taking cues from the Inca's modular stonework. Instead of massive concrete pours, they're 3D printing interlocking stone blocks with fractal geometries that distribute weight like the walls of Machu Picchu. These blocks snap together without mortar, allowing the structure to flex during earthquakes before settling back into perfect alignment. The real breakthrough. AI is now optimizing these ancient patterns, running millions of simulations to find shapes that balance load distribution with material efficiency, something medieval masons achieved through generations of trial and error. The result: bridges that behave less like rigid sculptures and more like living systems, adapting to stresses the way a tree bends in the wind. Some of the most promising fusions are happening underwater. Inspired by Roman concrete's seawater resistance, the U.S. Navy is testing a new marine-grade concrete that incorporates volcanic ash and ground oyster shells, materials Roman builders would have recognized. When submerged, this mix doesn't just resist erosion. It grows tougher as minerals in the water react with the ash to form new crystalline structures. It's a literal case of modern problems requiring ancient solutions, with naval engineers poring over Pliny the Elder's notes on Roman harbor construction for clues. The most radical shift isn't in materials but in mindset. Japanese engineers designing the next generation of seismic bridges have adopted a principle they call Yatsuhashi, named after the 8th century zigzag bridges in Kyoto's gardens. These weren't built straight because their designers understood that gentle curves absorb shock better than rigid lines. Modern iterations use shape memory alloys that remember their original form after bending, combining samurai-era wisdom with space-age metallurgy. What's emerging isn't a choice between old and new, but a dialogue. When AI analyzes the Pont du Gard's arches, it doesn't just confirm their strength, it reveals subtle asymmetries medieval scholars missed, curves adjusted by eyeball that turn out to perfect the flow of forces. Ancient builders didn't have computational fluid dynamics, but they had something equally powerful: generations of watching how water moves. Now, with machine learning passing their intuition, we're finally speaking their language, one where the best bridges aren't just built, but grown, healed, and whispered into existence across time. The collapse of the Minneapolis I-35W bridge in 2007 wasn't just a tragedy, it was déjà vu. Investigators found the steel gusset plates, thinner than original design specified, had rusted from the inside out, their weakness hidden beneath layers of paint until the fatal moment they gave way. This exact scenario would have baffled a medieval mason. They built knowing corrosion was inevitable, so they chose materials that aged gracefully, stone piers that grew moss but never crumbled, iron clamps sealed in lead to resist moisture. The irony: we had blueprints for longevity gathering dust in history books, while our modern bridges failed from problems ancient engineers had already solved. Look deeper and the parallels grow more unsettling. The Morandi Bridge in Genoa collapsed in 2018 due to corroded cables inside concrete, a flaw the Romans circumvented by using open spandrel arches that let inspectors see structural elements. Their bridges wore their skeletons on the outside, while we bury ours in concrete tombs, hoping no one notices the decay until it's too late. Even maintenance strategies diverged starkly. The Inca didn't wait for their grass bridges to fray. Entire villages gathered annually to renew them strand by strand. Meanwhile, Minnesota's transportation department had flagged the I-35W's vulnerabilities years before its collapse, but repairs were deferred, budgets trimmed, warnings filed away. The financial toll of ignoring history is staggering. Rebuilding the Minneapolis Bridge cost $234 million, nearly triple what proactive maintenance would have totaled. Multiply that by the 60,000 structurally deficient bridges in the U.S. alone, and the math becomes apocalyptic. Yet ancient projects like the Pont du Gard, built for a fraction of Rome's GDP, saved money over centuries by amortizing costs across generations. Our obsession with upfront savings has trapped us in a cycle of emergency rebuilds, each more expensive than the last. What's truly galling is how selectively we apply historical wisdom. Modern earthquake engineering now embraces principles Inca masons used: instinctively flexible joints, weighted bases, materials that bend rather than break. But these revelations only followed deadly quakes that shattered rigid modern structures. Why must we relearn through catastrophe what our ancestors documented in stone? The Roman architect Vitruvius wrote detailed treatises on building durable harbors in 2000 B.C. Yet 20th century engineers had to rediscover his self-healing concrete after their own ports crumbled in decades. The resistance isn't technological, it's cultural. Ancient builders worked on timelines that humbled them. The master mason who laid the first stone of the Alcantara Bridge knew he'd never see its completion, yet he carved, "I built this to last forever," into the keystone. Today, infrastructure projects are tied to election cycles and quarterly reports. Their caretakers incentivized to cut corners for short-term wins. We've replaced generational patience with spreadsheet logic, and the bridges like the one in Minneapolis are paying the price. There are flickers of hope. Norway's new coastal highway uses Roman-inspired volcanic ash concrete after studies proved its longevity. Japan's Century Bridges program mandates 100-year lifespans, with engineers training apprentices in traditional joinery alongside computer modeling. These hybrids of old and new don't just work, they thrive, proving history isn't a shackle but a springboard. The lesson isn't that modern engineering has failed. It's that we've been running a marathon with only half the toolbox. Those ancient bridges still standing aren't relics to admire, they're cheat codes waiting for us to crack them open. Because every collapsed modern bridge isn't just a disaster. It's a receipt for wisdom we already owned but refused to use. Every stone in the Alcantara Bridge whispers a message. Carved into its central arch, an inscription reads, "I built this bridge to last forever," not just as a boast, but as a direct conversation with the future. The Romans didn't just engineer for stability. They embedded their values, names, and even curses for those who might neglect their work. These weren't vanity projects. They were time capsules in mortar and rock, designed to outlive empires and speak to civilizations unborn. What does it say about a culture when its bridges are built to endure not just physically but philosophically? Take the mysterious markings on the Ponte Pietra in Verona. To modern eyes, they're just grooves and symbols, but archaeologists realized they were precise alignment guides not for the original builders, but for those who would repair the bridge centuries later. Each chisel stroke was a manual for the future, a way of saying, "This is how we did it, follow our lead." Compare that to today's steel beams stamped with barcodes that fade in decades, or concrete slabs with rebar that rusts unseen. Our bridges carry no messages, no instructions, just serial numbers for replacement. Artwork on ancient bridges served a similar purpose. The gargoyles of the Ponte Valentray aren't just decorations, they're hydrological calculators. Their open mouths are precisely angled to spit rainwater clear of vulnerable joints, a lesson in hydraulics carved in stone. Even the zigzag patterns on Islamic bridges like Iran's Coc Pol aren't arbitrary. They trace load paths, showing future generations where weight should flow. These weren't just builders, they were teachers, leaving blackboards in granite for pupils they'd never meet. Now imagine a modern bridge trying to communicate across millennia. What would it say? Inspection dates stenciled on beams, corporate logos etched into concrete. The contrast is jarring. Ancient bridges carried the names of engineers who staked their legacies on their work, like Apollodorus of Damascus, whose signature arches still stand in Rome. Today, construction plaques list contractors and completion dates, but no promises. No one inscribes "this will hold." We've swapped permanence for expediency, and in doing so, we've built bridges that might carry traffic, but carry no meaning. The most haunting examples are the unintended messages. On the ruins of the Roman bridge in Trier, Germany, you'll find 4th century graffiti scratched by soldiers stationed there, mundane complaints about rations and cold weather. These weren't meant to last, yet here they are, humanizing the past in ways no textbook could. Meanwhile, the steel supports of the collapsed Silver Bridge in West Virginia now sit in a museum, their rusted fractures labeled as evidence. Both are messages, but one speaks of life, the other of failure. Perhaps the most poignant lesson lies in what's missing. The Incas' grass bridges left no inscriptions because their message wasn't carved in stone, but woven into ritual. Every year, communities renewed them together, passing down techniques orally for generations. Their bridges said, "We are still here." Our modern spans, though technically advanced, often whisper the opposite. We expected this to be temporary. So what would our bridges say about us if they lasted 2,000 years? Maybe that we valued speed over longevity, profit over permanence. Or perhaps they'd reveal quiet exceptions, like the Golden Gate Bridge's ongoing preservation, where each rivet saved is a small act of defiance against time. The truth is, we're still learning how to build for the future, but the ancients left us a challenge etched in stone. If you want to speak across centuries, build like you mean it. The stones of ancient bridges whisper secrets we've stopped hearing, that durability requires patience, that nature must be partnered with, and that true engineering is an act of faith in the future. Look at the Pont du Gard, its arches standing firm for 2 millennia, not because the Romans had better tools, but because they had a better relationship with time. They didn't rush the curing of their mortar or the settling of their foundations. They built knowing their grandchildren's grandchildren would walk across these stones, and that patience is etched into every block. Modern engineering, for all its brilliance, often treats time as an enemy. To outrun concrete poured today must bear traffic tomorrow, steel expected to defy corrosion without complaint. The ancients understood what we've forgotten. Some things can't be accelerated. Nature wasn't an obstacle to these builders, it was a collaborator. The Incas' grass bridges swayed with mountain winds instead of resisting them. The Romans positioned their piers where rivers whispered their deepest secrets, spots where currents ran true and bedrock lay close. Today, we blast through hillsides and reroute rivers to fit our blueprints, then act surprised when floods or landslides retaliate. The Kintai Bridge in Japan survives typhoons not by brute strength, but by surrendering to them, its wooden planks designed to detach harmlessly, then be reassembled like a seasonal ritual. There's humility in that approach, a recognition that the best designs don't conquer nature, they converse with it. Most striking is how these ancient bridges embody a kind of radical optimism. When the builder of the Alcantara Bridge carved, "I built this to last forever," he wasn't just boasting, he was making a covenant with the unborn. That's a staggering act of faith, one that modern infrastructure rarely matches. Our bridges come with warranties and lifespans, their expiration dates baked into the concrete. We've mastered the science of short-term efficiency, but lost the art of long-term legacy. The Romans didn't just construct arches, they constructed trust that future generations would maintain their work, that civilizations would endure, that the world would still need this crossing centuries later. The irony, we now have the technology to build like the ancients, better, even. Self-healing concrete inspired by Roman recipes, seismic-resistant designs borrowed from the Inca, corrosion-proof alloys that outlast steel. The missing ingredient isn't knowledge, it's vision. Are we building for next quarter's earnings report or for the next millennium? The Ponte Vecchio in Florence didn't survive by accident. It survived because someone in every generation believed it was worth saving. So here's the challenge these silent stone teachers leave us. Durability isn't just about materials or techniques. It's about what we value. When we look at a bridge, do we see a cost line item or a covenant? A traffic solution or a testament? The ancients built like they were signing letters to the future. Maybe it's time we started writing back. If this journey across the centuries has sparked your curiosity, share in the comments what lessons from these timeless builders resonate with you. And for more deep dives into history's untold genius, subscribe and join us as we keep unraveling the past to reimagine